Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Noona's Noonchi podcast, where I do deep dives and reactions to some of your favorite K-dramas with special guests.
Hi everyone, my name is Carol Markway. I am in Vancouver and I go by Hershey. In my real life, I am a training manager at a security company here in Vancouver.
Oh, hi, my name is Doris. I'm a chemical manufacturer out in Boston, and my pronouns are she, her, and they, them is also fine.
Hi everyone, my name is Kalichi, but I also go by Kay. And in my real life, I work for an environmental nonprofit, but I'm also a spoken word artist, poet, aspiring novelist, and I go by the pronouns she, her.
Hey, I'm Gael. I guess I'm a recent college grad, pre-med. So that's definitely what I'm focusing my time on right now, is studying for the MCAT. But yeah, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Yeah.
So, who wants to go first? But basically, how did you first get into K-dramas? I think this can be the same question to everybody. How and when and what got you hooked? So it's a loaded question, but I want to know your journeys through the world of Korean dramas. Let's start with Gael.
Okay, so I got into K-dramas through K-pop, actually. And I've said this story many times, so y'all heard it. But I was like a Big Bang fan back in the day. And T.O.P. was like my bias, and he's like an actor. So I was like, oh, he's an actor. He's in these dramas. Let me look it up. So I like searched up the drama, and the drama was I Am Sam. It's very old. It's honestly not memorable, but it was like the perfect drama to get into, right? Because there was T.O.P. was in it. Lee Min-ho was also in it. So was Park Min-young. And I was like, oh, who are these people? So after I watched I Am Sam, I watched Iris as my second drama, and that was the one that hooked me in. Like I was like, it was like a big production, right? It had Kim Tae-hee, Lee Byung-hyun, and I was like, okay, what's going on? There's action, people are dying, and ever since then, after you always do the like classic, just like start looking up the actors and watching everything they've done. So then I started watching Boys Over Flowers, everything that Lee Min-ho did. And I guess that's just been the journey since then. Like I even like got a Viki subscription. Like, yeah, but when I was in undergrad, I kind of had to tone down K-dramas. Like I didn't stop watching it, but I definitely only had like one or two instead of just like 5 or 6, because I had to focus on school. But yeah, especially now with the pandemic, right? There's like, I'm not really going outside anymore like that. So I've just been, getting back on like the K-drama train. So yeah, that's my story.
Cool, I love it. Oh my gosh. And then, okay, Carol, you're up next now. How did you get into K-dramas? When? And just tell us a little bit about your journey in that world, in this world.
Okay. I grew up in Ghana, and when I was a kid, they do show a lot of K-dramas. They show a lot of Japanese and Chinese dramas on national TV, and they would dub them in our local languages. And so when I was a kid, I remember my first drama being a Japanese one called Oshin, like way back when. And then Journey to the West was the Chinese one, and then Daejangum was the Korean, and that began the journey. And these K dramas, telenovelas, soap operas, they're so popular in Ghana, where it becomes a fireside chat. So for me, it continued all the way till about when I got into high school. I went to a boarding school in the beginning, and I did one semester in the boarding school and then decided to move out, go back home rather, move out of the boarding room and go back home. And I just picked up my K drama watching then, where we were using back in the day the dial up internet method where it goes that thing. And I'd load all my episodes and watch them, binge them, watch the whole thing, go to school and start selling subtitles and spoilers to people because they wanted to know what was happening and they couldn't wait a week. So I was their source of information. And then 2007, I moved to Canada with my family. My mom was doing her PhD in Vancouver, so we moved here. And when we moved, I came at an awkward time, so I couldn't go into college right away. And then due to culture shock and learning and all of that, K-drama became therapy for me. And so 2007 was my learning more about myself, trying to figure out where I fit in Vancouver. Yeah.
Thank you. Of course, you're using a keyword therapy, which we'll go back to for K-dramas. Doris, you're up next. Tell us about your journey.
So my journey is actually the same as Carol's. I'm Ghanaian as well. I grew up in Ghana, and as she said, pretty much everything she said could literally just the same thing. We grew up watching, I remember Oshin on TV. And one of the first K-drama that I actually remember, and I know I'd seen older ones, was Winter Sonata. That was the one I watched, and that's an elite, you know. And then as an adult, like as I was in college and high school, like I had time on my hand, dial-up internet, I downloaded, and I would like binge watch it, and not sell them to my friends though, but like I would pass them around. Carol, I do stand, I should have done that. I would have made a pretty penny, but like I would give them to my friends to watch as well. And I became the go-to in my class for like, oh, she has all the K-dramas you want to watch, go to. And it is funny that she mentioned that Oshid and Journey to the West, because even now, I know now they do show a lot of Korean drama, Chinese dramas, telenovelas, and it's translated into the local dialects as well. But the fun thing that they do, which I actually think is hilarious, is they have like discussion panels on them. Like they invite, you know, counselors, sometimes pastors, sometimes, you know, people with in which society views as having, you know, great value, or they have high moral standards or whatever, and they invite them and they discuss the episodes with these people. And sometimes they have viewers called in, and like they do it in the various languages. So like maybe they show it on Sunday, Monday will be for the Chi, and then Sunday will be for Ga. So various languages, so they can all have their discussion panels, and the whole show is dubbed in whichever local language that they want to show on the TV. So that's my favorite thing, the discussion panels. I'm like, oh man, that'd be nice to be able to discuss it, you know, talk about each episode. But yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. Wow. Okay, Kalichi.
It all started a dark and stormy day with Taeyong. It's so dramatic, actually. It was when so I'm also West African, I'm Nigerian, and I grew up in Ivory Coast. So I also immigrated to the US, and my whole life, like being multicultural, like I grew up watching anime, I grew up watching things in French and Japanese, like French is my first language, watching shows in Japanese and in Spanish in Ivory Coast, and then moving to the US, learning English, and watching TV was always was how I learned what American culture was, and how it helped me adjust, like listening to music, listening to pop culture in America, right, to help me adjust to becoming American. And fast forward to 8th grade, I came here when I was like 3rd grade. So like fast forward like 5 years later, like 8th grade. And so I'm in Seattle now. I first lived in Cincinnati, like the ghetto. And now I'm in Seattle, and like I'm like around Asian culture for the first time. And I had these two friends who were arguing over this guy in front of, like, you know how you used to stick papers in front of your binder, like I'm dating myself, and you know, make your own cover. And so this girl had made a cover of like this like shirtless Taeyong picture, right? And I'm like, they're arguing, they're like, this, she's like, he's ugly. I'm like, no, he's not. And they're like, Kalechi, break the tie, is this guy ugly or not? And I was like, oh no, he's beautiful, like, who is this man? Taeyong from Big Bang. So very similar to Gael, like I got into K-pop, got into Big Bang, became a huge TVXQ fan actually first before even becoming a huge Big Bang fan. And so I'm watching the variety shows, trying to see, and then I came across, it should have been Top, right? It should have been TOP. That was my first gateway into K-drama, but it wasn't. For some random reason, I don't know why, I started watching My Love Patsy. It's like an old drama. I don't know if any of you seen it. Or like Ne Sarang Patchui. I think that's the Korean name. It had like Jung Nara, Kim Rae-won, Kim Jae-won, and I cannot tell you. I think it was terrible, probably, but I got really obsessed with Kim Jae-won and Kim Rae-won, and I started trying to like watch their drama. So I got immediately hooked on the older actors, and that nothing has changed since then, honestly. But that's kind of how it started, and then I kept watching more than my friends who were also into K-pop. By the time I got into high school, all Black girls, also hasn't really changed since then. Also be like, oh, what are you watching? And I was like, oh, I'm watching Korean drama. They're like, oh, not a variety show? I was like, no, you need to get on my level. And so after that, like they fueled my addiction, I fueled their addiction. And then I also took a break in college because school. But then later half, when I started doing my master's, I got my master's in public diplomacy, and part of that, my specific area was in cultural and gastro diplomacy. And so a lot of my work in grad school was actually talking about East Asia, and cultural diplomacy in like Korea, especially how they used their entertainment. So how K-dramas and K-pop was used as soft power initiatives, which I can talk about all day, but that's so basically grad school made me more of a K-drama addict.
Okay, so that's super cool. So now I'm just going to answer a question, and then just raise your hand who wants to answer it, and then we'll like go from there. Okay. Clearly, the thing you guys have in common here is I don't see any Asians on my screen. So what is it about K-dramas that you can explain that draws you in your own experience from Ghana, Western, you said Ghana too, or West Africa? Khalid, you said West Africa, right?
Yeah, Nigeria.
Nigeria, sorry. And so, and then I know Gael's more US, but still talk about your experience. Just, because I just think people say representation matters. You hear that, right? But when it comes to Korean dramas, I'm not finding that necessarily be the case. So I want to hear anybody who wants to share about how they relate. Yes, go ahead. Let's start with Gael.
You know what's funny? I forgot. I was gonna mention after everyone finished. I was gonna say that I'm also from outside of the U.S. I'm from Haiti originally. I didn't mention that, but yeah. So I grew up watching telenovelas, and they were dubbed. They weren't like Korean shows. They were just like Venezuelan or like Spanish telenovelas. So like that's something that's like already part of just like like culturally, just like that's something I was used to doing. But yeah, in that instance, I think that also applies to like why I like started watching K-dramas. It wasn't different for me to watch a show that's like not US, right? That's not based in the US. It was very normal to me. Like, I don't know, I think I consider myself as like a child of the internet. Like, I just like had so many different phases, right? And I think although K-drama started as a phase, it's something that like lasted honestly forever. So that also kind of adds into like why I like K-dramas. And to your earlier point, I guess representation matter point, I think that I think that phrase is mostly about just like I think if you use it in a US context, right? The US is a very like diverse place, and it applies there in a sense like our media is very white, right? We don't see faces that are diverse, but um I don't know if that applies for K-dramas, because I think it's something that just like it's a Korean industry, right? And like it's for Asians, it's for Koreans, especially Koreans. So like I think if you want representation matters, I would always argue that maybe you should broaden your scope and look outside of the US to get that representation, honestly, right? Because I think we tend to focus on like the US as like, if they're not on CNN, they're not anywhere. That's not true. I think like I think we're global now, and like you could go to Korea and see Koreans, right? I definitely think it applies here too, and it's important here too. But I think not seeing yourself on screen in the US, that shouldn't stop you. I think you should really just like look outside of the US, right? That's just that's what that's it.
Yeah, to add to that point, I really agree with Gael, but I think rewinding it back to the first half of your question, like what about Korean dramas appeals to me as an Ivorian born Nigerian American woman, right? None of my identities really align with what you would think of an Asian production, right? And that's what I want to tack that as a lie. I think a lot of us in the US and Western dominated culture have been hoodwinked to believe that if we don't see ourselves on screen, that is not a story that that is about us. Especially like because all we've seen are white stories in Western media. And so granted, of course, white stories are very different from POC stories, from Asian Pacific stories. But I think when we turn the narrative to the POC community, right, there's a universal stories of love, of pain, of motherhood, of being a young adult, of pursuing dreams and failing, wanting to be known, wanting to experience the highs and the lows. Like all of those things are universal, like human stories. And especially being Nigerian, like I know like my culture, what is dominant in my culture, like the respecting of elders, like respecting of your parents, not going into a field that is not being a doctor, lawyer, or an engineer. Like all of those things are like my stories, right? And I see them represented in not just Korean, but in Chinese and Taiwanese and Filipino and Thai and Singapore, all of which are countries of which shows I've watched, right? I see that in my telenovelas. I see that in even watching some shows in like some Western European shows. Like we are been taught to believe that like Western media is the narrative, it's the, the creme de la creme, but and that every other culture is outside of that, when it's the truth is every other culture outside of that is really the culture, is the dominant culture, like the South, global South, as we call it in academia. We have so much more in common with each other than belief, but white supremacists and colonization has made us think that we are further apart to each other than we actually are. And I think Korean drama has helped me realize that. Korean culture got me interested in political affairs and international relations, and it's the reasons why I studied in school. And it's my hope and prayer that like as an artist, as a poet, like as a person who wants to bring people together, as a lover of Korean dramas, that other people from who look like me also realize that our stories are everywhere and that our stories are global too.
Okay, amazing. But I almost teared up because because I relate too. You said it so well. Does anybody else want to add to that, Carol or Doris?
So I just want to just pretty much they said everything, but I think there's a, for me coming from Ghana and growing up and watching these things on TV and have like listening to radio, I'm telling you, radio discussions about these shows. It's a bit about, I don't know if I should use the word immigrant culture. Like there's an aspect that for whatever reason, Africans, and I'm going to speak specifically for Ghanaians, I think also Nigeria, there's something about the Korean culture that we can relate to because a lot of the issues that they're going through, like with the education system, like I'm sure Carol and Kelechi can attest, when you come home and you're not first, the first thing your parents are going to ask you is the first thing who was first, did they have two heads? Like, why did they get first and you didn't get first? You feel me? So it's there's like there's so many things that we can relate to, and it touches on what Gael and Kelechi said. There's so many aspects. There's things that due to white supremacy and other factors, we all feel like we're so different. But in actuality, we have some similarities. Of course, we're not the exact same, but there's certain things that we have in common that if we put aside the differences, and of course, like we can't put everything aside, but like if we kind of just figure out which way we can kind of unify and kind of just enjoy things together, whether entertainment, whether whatever, we can enjoy things together. I think so much, like there'll be so much, like everything will be a little bit better, just much better, just much better. Yeah.
I do agree with Doris. I especially like as she said, having an opportunity to chat about it on the radio and on TV. And one thing that also brings up is an opportunity for us to talk about our social norms and activities. And when you bring up a topic, let's say either mental health or education or something, we are able to relate it into our culture and say, oh yes, in Ghana, we do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Why do we do this? And we should be doing this instead. So it brings up an opportunity to have dialogue because sometimes, well, in Ghana, we don't necessarily sit down and talk about our feelings. And we're quite like the rest where our family or our parents will, um, let's say, scold us in public, praise us in private. And so our emotions, and we don't get to talk about those things. And through TV, we're able to have the conversation sometimes. So it's really good.
I really like how you said that. Scold in public, praise in private. That's awesome. So, let's talk about your love for K-dramas. Do you feel like, yeah, you're right. I love how you say you identify more than we think we do, right? And you brought up a great point about some of the narratives we've been taught or we hear. So then, have you ever felt like you had to defend your love for K-dramas to a fellow Asian? Just curious.
Yes. Oh, I forgot to raise my hand. It's always surprising to me when a lot of times like Korean Americans come into the Clubhouse room just like, what do you like about K-drama? It's like, I grew up with it, so like it's a normal part of my life, but you're not Korean. And I'm just like, it like I kind of want to I think about it in the sense like we're like expected to understand narratives, like white narratives, and the fact that like people think that non-white narratives, then there should be like a reason why, right? I think it's just like with a little cultural context, I don't see why you couldn't watch K-dramas. I don't know. I'm always like perplexed as like why did it like I'm just like it's media, it's entertaining, the stories are good. It's only 16 to 20 episodes. Like what's not to like? It's sub too, so clearly there's a market for it. So I'm always like interested to know why people ask that question. But I'm just saying, like, we're expected to understand any Marvel movie that comes out. No one thinks about like, do you understand the American context of it being, in New York? And like, I think like we're taught that that's like the norm. I'm just like, I don't know. I feel like with a little, reading about history, even without that, I think K-drama was like I can understand to like the emotion that they're trying to, showcase. I don't know. That's just yeah. But anyone else? No.
I just wanted to quickly add to that. I think it's kind of sad. It makes it usually when I get that question, like why, like depending on how it's asked, I get really excited to talk about it, right? Because I have all these like context and I can talk about my history, can talk about my love and my passion for storytelling. But I think there has been some times where it's been very accusatory, like, well, like why, like how dare you be into Korean dramas from a lot of different cultures actually. Like I've had my Black friends ask me why, I've had my Korean friends ask me why, and I think a lot of it comes from like cultural fear, right? That it's like, oh, are you trying to take something that's mine? Are you trying to, like, do you understand what is ours? And I think like, and I get where that comes from, right? Because I think as me as a Black woman, like when I see someone take something from Black culture or showcase something from Black culture, my first instinct is to be weary. My first instinct is to fear, because it 9.9999 times out of 10, it is not working. So I get it. And we've seen the results of, we've seen Hollywood take aspects of Asian culture and bastardize it, right? So I think for me, it's like I see it as a fear. Like I see it as like a gut instinct reaction as saying like, what are you doing with something that I hold dear? What are you doing with something that's about my people? Like, how are you treating it? And that's kind of what I read into it. And like I always respond with like, I take great care. And like I think even if someone casually watched K-dramas and didn't like go into the spiral that a lot of us addicts have, where we like learn about the culture, start learning the language, all of those things, like even if you're a casual watcher, I think like rebranding it as like, I'm celebrating, I'm enjoying. You have something great that the world loves, and that's something to celebrate. And unfortunately, like white media has made us fear that. Um, but I think, like part of Korean drama is like part of the Hallyu wave, like continuing to grow, is really getting to a point where you're accepting that there's going to be people on that spectrum who are going to watch it and appropriate it or make it more or less than it is. And then there's others who are really going to love it and appreciate, like I believe that we do, and truly take care with the culture and the language and some of the historical and like context that is going on. Yeah, like that's kind of what I have to say about that.
So yeah, I have been attacked about my love for K-drama a lot, very much. I have beef with a lot of people. It's on site for some of them, JK. But I reached a point where I stopped defending it because I, like Gael and Kelechi, I always used to ask, okay, you don't, if I tell you I'm into Marvel, like you don't bat an eye. You do not ask me, oh, why do you like this or XYZ? Or I don't live in the UK, but if I tell you I'm watching Shameless, the UK version, you do not ask me, oh, why are you watching that? Like, what's the reason? Nobody ever asked me that. But I say I like Korean drama, all of a sudden you're upset. But like, and I stopped trying to defend. I stopped trying to be like, oh, but I watch Nollywood, I watch Gollywood, I watch, J dramas. I stopped because I decided that I do not need to defend. The culture is amazing. They put out great content, great content that a lot of people from my community relate to. It's okay. It's okay to like something. And in no way do I, to the best of my knowledge, I don't appropriate anything in there. I just enjoy the show, chat up kiki about it with my friends, and we watch another show. We do not try, from what I watch, a lot of people from my community. And again, we're not a monolith, so I'm not speaking for everybody. But what I know is we just love the show, we enjoy it, and we keep it push it. We just leave it alone. But again, with Kelechi's point, I think a lot of people, when I get the question from Koreans, I understand where the question is coming from because again, they like we have a fear of how people will handle the things that we hold dear to us or the things that represent us. We have a fear of how other people, especially, and this is shade to white people, especially how white media handles our culture. We've seen it all the time. Recently, it just came out, Train to Busan is coming out, the remake. And a lot of people are like, first of all, America, there's no speed rail. What are you doing? Like, what are you gonna do? Train to Boston? It's not happening. What are you doing? No. But like, I'm not gonna watch it. It's not everyday remake. Sometimes leave things as it is. It's perfectly fine in the medium it's presented in. It's okay. Subtitles won't hurt you. You know. So I stopped defending. I stopped. It's they're great form of entertainment. I can just come home from work, watch a couple episodes, get on Clubhouse, call Gael and be like, you know what? I am mad about this character. Let's talk about why I need to meet them outside and square up. It's fun, and I leave it at that. I just enjoy it and I leave it at that. But again, I understand where that fear is coming from. We hold a lot. We've seen they've seen what happens to other cultures who all of a sudden the West has interest in. We've seen what happens. It's diluted, it's bastardized. So yeah, that's all I have to add.
How about
For me, yeah, for me, I do not talk about it at all. I went through phases of really sharing that I loved it to having responses like, oh, do you have yellow fever? Is that why? Do you're disrespecting it? You don't really belong. You want to be a Korea boo and things like that. And that really, I understood where it was coming from, to be fair. But that also made me close up my passion, and only my close friends and family know about it. And so for me, I'm watching Korean drama 7 days a week. And it has been like that for at least since 2007. And to not be able to speak about it is it's very hurtful, because it's a part of me, it's a part of my daily experience. And then when I found Clubhouse, I was listening in. I've been first I was listening in and trying to contribute from time to time, but my passion, I felt like my passion had gone beyond just enjoying it to I was bringing it in my schoolwork, doing projects on the effects of K-drama on tourism. I have a tourism degree. So the effects of K-drama on tourism, where it could go, what product placement means in a society at large, and how and the effect of it on profits and the bottom line. So I've really done a lot of research in that aspect, and in trying to separate myself from being seen as a career boo, I decided not to talk about it at all. So when I got to Clubhouse and I saw these ladies and they were sharing, I was like, okay, this is home. This is where I can be myself. This is where I can talk about all my passions and sort of bring my whole self to a conversation. So very grateful, Gael. And yeah, now I'm happy to be out.
Thanks for joining us on the Noona's Noonchi podcast. You can listen in on platforms such as Spotify, Pandora, Google, and Apple, but also watch the podcast on our Noona's Noonchi YouTube channel every Monday, where it launches at 6 p.m. Eastern.